this latest edition of the All in Skills podcast. This week, I'm very happy to be joined by Dr. Suzanne Zyngier. Suzanne, hello, how are you?
I'm extremely well, thank you, Colin, and I hope you're the same.
How would you describe yourself at the moment? You seem an extremely busy person. What's the busyness that occupies your life?
I am retired from my position as an academic, but I continue to work with a couple of not-for-profits on their boards and a for-profit institution as the chair of their board. So that plus general things like hiking and pottering around in the garden. Yes, it's a busy but pleasant life. Thank you.
So you're not just a retiree sitting around waiting for something to do.
Goodness, no, never been my want.
Sue, what was your background, educationally speaking?
In my first 2 degrees were bachelor's and then a postgraduate diploma. And then later in life, I decided that I wanted to do some professional development in the direction of knowledge management. But actually, I didn't want to pay for it. So I went back to university and did a research master's degree and then fell in love with doing the research. And then I did a PhD. I didn't graduate from my PhD until I was in my very early 50s. So it was quite a big break in my academic life. And I'd had a very comfortable consulting career before that. But academia opened new doors for me in a way that I could continue to extend and develop myself, because you never stop learning and you never stop being curious. And doing the same thing for 40 years would not be terribly exciting, quite frankly.
Do you come from a studious family? Was there an expectation in your youth that you would end up in university?
There was an expectation that I'd do a bachelor's degree, but and then get a good profession, or perhaps even some sort of postgraduate qualification. But, nobody expected any of us to end up at university as PhDs, although my father did a PhD late in life and my family is littered with them, mostly the boys, because I'm afraid I am a woman of the sort of 60s, 70s, and the expectations were not that of a woman in those days.
I was actually going to ask that question because I remember my mother, who would be older than you, but when she went to university in the 60s in the UK, it was teaching or nursing was kind of the expectation. Did that linger in your time in Australia, or was it different?
I was thinking of doing nursing. I did not want to stand up in front of a classroom. It's not my personality to do that sort of thing, particularly young people. So I became a librarian, which was an ideal profession for somebody who liked reading and sharing their love of books. But as I said, later in life, that wasn't really enough, even though I'd set up a consultancy to do that in the professional services sector. Just didn't give me enough to fire all the bits of the engine.
How long did it take for you to go into the path of consultancy, and how common a choice was that for somebody with your qualifications?
It was very uncommon in the information management area. It was something that happened as a consequence of having children and wanting to work part-time. An off-the-cuff suggestion by a friend of asking whether I ever did any private work led me to not just doing private work for his firm, which was an accounting firm, but also to get a list of all the law firms that I could and all the accounting firms that I could, and I developed a brochure and did a mail out. I thought if one medium-sized firm wants that service, then more than one wants that service. And as I said, it led to a 14, 15-year career in consulting. And I had employees as well. But, all good things get passed on, and I passed on that service to one of my members of staff.
How competitive was that space? Are we talking about the 80s at this point?
In the 90s. Very beginning of the 90s. Australia was and still is doing very well, even in the sort of middle band sector, and it just seemed to work extremely well.
How much was this connected to the rise in the ubiquity of information technology, computers on desks, that kind of thing?
So I think about the third year that I was doing this, I was doing some work in an insurance company, a very large global one, their local head office in Melbourne. And they introduced network computers. Prior to that, it had been standalones, and the PAs were still all using typewriters, smart typewriters, but nonetheless typewriters. So it was transformational for the organisation, and that was replicated throughout medium-sized businesses, because large-scale businesses already had mainframes in their basements. The internet didn't come until much later. So in those days, we were doing full-text searches on databases to get information for people, information resource for people, but you had to pay for those subscriptions individually, and you had to use search language. It wasn't free text searching. You had to know the grammatical syntax for the searching. To put the dots and dashes and things.
How long into your consultancy work did you start to take on staff? Because it sounds to me like in your mind you're thinking, I'm raising children and I want to work part-time. Was that a bit of a psychological leap for you to start saying, this is bigger than I can handle? Have I bitten off more than I can chew?
It was a logical leap for me because I met others who said, that's a good idea, but I could never do that. So I took them on as employees.
And were these people with specialities that were different from your own, with backgrounds and experience that were different?
They were all professional librarians. A professional librarian, and you can work across all disciplines. It's pretty straightforward as long as you've got the right qualification.
In these days before LinkedIn and the social networks we now live with, for better or worse, how is it that you would find each other? Are we talking about a relatively small community of people?
I think it was a relatively small community. And in those days where Melbourne is now 5.5 million people, there were probably only about 3 million. It was fairly stratified. So, the middle classes live in a much more discreet area. The cost of housing wasn't as great as it is now. And friends of friends would network me with other people. And it just seemed to work. I never placed an ad for people in my consultancy.
Were there competitors?
Not that I was aware of. Most people, as I think I might have said earlier, most people went from their postgraduate qualifications and applied for jobs in either public libraries, scientific libraries. Some of the large legal firms had libraries, but very few medium-sized firms had their information organised for them properly.
Amazing. Did this work take you beyond Melbourne, beyond Australia?
Not beyond Australia. It did give me a few gigs out in the country, which was fun. And I once got an inquiry from Sydney, but not until much later did I actually get work in Sydney, and that was actually through LinkedIn. I no longer do that sort of consulting work. I've retired from that and now focus on the directorships that I'm involved with.
You said earlier, all good things come to an end. What was the spark, I suppose, that made you think, okay, time to move on?
I was starting to get bored. It didn't do enough for me. And as I said, I wanted some professional development in a slightly different direction. And because research degrees for Australians were fee-free, I thought a research degree would be into the area that I was looking at, would be a really interesting thing to do. It was a commitment of a year, maybe a little more. So I started sending my idea, my proposal, together with my CV to a few people. And a professor at Monash University took me up on that. I had to then prove, because I'd been out of the university sector for a while, that I had the capacity to write research work. So I sent them a consulting report that I'd written, and I got a yes virtually immediately, because that was data analysis and conclusions drawn. It did not include the literature review, which is standard in a research thesis. But they wouldn't have expected me to, nor did I have access to the university resources at the time. So I completed my research masters, and I had the taste for research, and I had the opportunity to get a scholarship with a stipend to continue on to a PhD.
Can I ask indelicately, how old were you at this point when you went to do the masters and then transition to the PhD?
I started doing the masters when I was, golly, I have to do the arithmetic, that's unfair. I think I was about 48 when I did the research masters, and then I commenced my PhD the following year of completion. I asked about converting my master's degree to a PhD, and my supervisor, who happened to be the same age as me, said, don't. She said, wait till you finish the thesis and then see how you feel about doing a PhD, which is, of course, a much larger commitment. So I graduated with my PhD when I was 51.
How challenging was it for you to have left academia for so long and then return at such a different stage in your life? I'm assuming at this point your children were older.
My youngest had just started secondary school.
So to a degree, a level of independence that you don't have with toddlers, but still a consideration.
Yes, my kids were really proud of me, and as was my husband. And I have to say that the master's was a taste of academia, and the PhD was probably one of the most self-indulgent things I'd ever done. Because for 3 years, I was paid a small, but still a stipend, to indulge myself intellectually and to take my research interest wherever I wanted to take it. And that was just such a privilege, really a privilege. Now I understand not everybody will think like that, but I continue to consider it a privilege, and one of the hardest working, because I had to stretch myself intellectually, but one of the hardest working and one of the most liberating things I've ever done. Because as a girl in the 60s, I did not have very high expectations of what I would do. And because I was bright at school, I was a bit bullied. So I didn't have very high expectations of what I thought I could do. And then all of a sudden, here I was, just flying. It was wonderful.
What advice would you give to people who find themselves in similar situations? We have a large population now, much larger population of young people going to do undergraduate degrees. I don't know what the percentage or proportions were in your day, but today in Australia, certainly over 50% of, I think, or approaching.
Nowhere near that. Although it did increase because the government, just before I started university, the government got rid of fees for Australian students. That has been reversed since, but we do have the HEC system, which is deferred debt, and that's tied to your earnings with the amount that you can pay back. So it's a privilege for you whose parents will be able to pay their fees, but tertiary and further education is still free for local students. And a lot of students do part of their undergraduate degree at these government colleges and then migrate to universities to complete. So the fees are problematic, but I believe fees are problematic everywhere. But it's still, the structure of fees has still allowed many people to be the first in their family in the 70s and 80s, the first in their family to ever go to university. And I think that that's changed the expectations of young people, which is truly wonderful.
Coming back to you now, so you've got a picture of you proudly holding your scroll in your gown with your family around you. What changed in your career after you acquired your?
I became an academic, and I had the joy of sharing what I knew with mainly postgraduate students. I moved from finishing my PhD to becoming a research fellow at Monash, and then that contract was coming to an end, and I applied for a research fellowship at La Trobe University, which was another university in Melbourne. And from there, I became a senior lecturer and then the director of a program. And then I interviewed for and was successful in applying for Associate Dean International at La Trobe University. I think that I know that my experience in the workplace greatly assisted my rapid rise through the academic ranks. So I achieved for 5 years what most people take 15 to 20 years to do. So I was operating as an associate professor and was the associate dean international. I was going overseas to represent our university at universities across Central America, Southeast Asia, North Asia, South Asia, and because I've had experience in interacting with people at a very high level, at dealing with employees, and I had the maturity already under my belt, I was taken very seriously, and I was able to leapfrog the usual time that it takes to reach that sort of level at university.
So there was an acknowledgement of your work experience, your profession experience that you gathered up until your return to academia. Do you think that there's a way that universities are perhaps neglecting that pathway, or that they should be encouraging more of people to follow a pathway that you sort of accidentally happened upon, perhaps, but clearly was very beneficial to your growth in academia as a result?
I think that it was done unconsciously on the part of the faculty, but that they were open to my being able to present, I think indicates that they knew that somebody with more maturity could engage better with other people at other universities, simply because I was closer to their age and I knew how to operate in the workplace. The level of deference required, the level of personal one-on-one engagement, which was really important. And I believe that my university recognised that this was to their advantage. It certainly was to mine.
So sort of a serendipitous situation in a sense, that you happen to be the right place, the right person in the right place, right university, right fit?
I think so, but I think that the right person, even a younger person, the right person can certainly, had I been in my 40s, moving into that position, and 40s is a decent age, and that's already a level of maturity that you don't see as somebody in their late 20s when they finish their postgraduate qualifications if they do a PhD. So if they do a PhD and they've been from school to undergraduate degree, perhaps an undergraduate degree with honours and then straight into a PhD, they're still only in their early 20s and they haven't had very much life experience. So it's reasonable for the university to say, well, we really want somebody with a bit more life experience, be it in the university sector or external. But I'd certainly encourage somebody to take the path that I did because it was fun. I was already quite confident in myself, and I think that makes a big difference.
A lot of what we do in All in Schools is focused on those people who are contemplating entering the job market or who are entering the job market, and they're at a very tricky moment. making choices and seeking guidance. What guidance was provided for you at that point?
Nothing.
Nothing?
Absolutely nothing. They just expect. I don't think that there was even a guidance counselor at the university at all. My university, at least, we were just expected to work it out for ourselves and learn how to develop our own CV and work out by dint of poor experience, perhaps, how to attend a job interview. So those things have changed a lot, thank goodness. Is walking into a job interview and no idea what it's going to be like. And they ask you the standard questions of, have you ever been in this difficult situation and how do you interact with people when they're taxing you? How would you solve problem X or Y in the workplace? And you're supposed to give evidence from a previous job situation. I would recommend to people who are tertiary education that they get jobs outside. So, for example, I worked in retail and I worked as a waitress and all of those sorts of things. And they do give you terrific problem-solving skills and capacity to and to learn how to interact with people. Don't use AI to write your CV because they all look the same and you want your CV to stand out. Make sure your photo is in colour on your CV and don't use, when you attach the CV, make sure your CV is not in white with black on white. Make sure it stands out. Let it be a very pale yellow, very pale, but still slightly different colour. So we'll go for it. And they pay extra attention. It used to be that one would put CV on coloured paper so that when it was in the pile of paper on the human resources department desk, that it would physically stand out, and always put a cover letter. Do research on the organisation you're going into so that you can point out the good things that you would like to help them with. Those sorts of things.
How long should a CV be for somebody who's 22, 23 years old?
Well, it can't be terribly long. And they're not really interested in all the things you did at school unless you happen to be the school captain, had a position of leadership, in which case you can say, in this position of leadership, I was able to demonstrate XYZ skills. It's always good to have been part of clubs where you get to be the and put your hand up for a leadership position in that club. It just shows that you take initiative, even at the sort of entry level participating things.
I've heard from somebody in recruitment that the most crucial part of the CV is the top third of the page. Is that true?
Absolutely. Catches your eye. Makes you want to keep reading. So, as I said, a photo doesn't hurt. Have a look at other CVs. There are lots on the internet. And see which one would stand out to you.
I know we haven't focused on it, but you obviously had children. 3 children?
Yes, 3 children.
How did you manage to juggle career as consultant, your studies, the academia, raising the children? How did that work out?
My husband David was very supportive. He's always been supportive of me and everything I've done. But he was also a participatory partner in raising children. When I was working, he happened to be a teacher at that time. He went from teaching into academia too. And he also did his PhD later in life. But our youngest was not even born when I started doing consulting. And I remember going to a client wearing a jacket that was loose. And I said, look, I'm going to be taking leave for the next 12 months. And I've got Louise, who is an employee, was going to be taking over my workload here. And he looked me in the eye and he said, why are you taking 12 months off? And I said, well, I'm 7 months pregnant. Apparently he hadn't noticed, which I thought was extraordinary. And then, so up until then, I'd only had a couple of smaller clients, 2 law firms, and 3 accounting firms. And I got to a point because I had a little one, I was swapping childcare with another person who'd also gone back to work part-time after she'd taken maternity leave. And at that point, David was also stepping up to help. He'd always helped with cooking with the cleaners that came into the house, so that made life a lot easier. And I was also doing quite a lot in the evening after the children were in bed. So I would see clients during the daytime, probably about 3 days a week. And I had other people. Those clients were one day a week, 4 hours a day, 4 hours for the day. So I could drop children at school and pick them up at the end of the day, or have a friend that I was swapping childcare with picking up children from the same school, or David would be able to get back to do that. It was still continued to be a very equitable relationship in relation to childcare. My own mother was working full-time and my mother-in-law was overseas, so I didn't have that sort of family support. At one point, I did employ a nanny a couple of afternoons a week to pick one of my children up from kindergarten, and that worked extremely well. I just had to be flexible about the way things were. But as I say, I was very fortunate that it was a very shared relationship in terms of looking after small kids. And then as they got older, I was fitting in my will and thought, and they were coming home from school by themselves, which was perfectly safe. And although we did have an alarm at the house so that I knew that when they came in, but I also knew if somebody came in before they got home from school. That gave me great confidence. It just worked really, really well. And certain market shopping can be done on the way home from work, or it can be done by having food delivered. And that was again shared.
Dr. Sue Zyngier, it's been a very interesting chat. Thanks so much for your time.
It's been a pleasure speaking with you, Colin. Thank you very much for asking me to join you.